The Gift of the Book. In a quiet old neighborhood of London, there stood a small library. Built with red bricks and decorated with stained glass windows, it carried an air of history and wisdom. Outside, the winter fog wrapped the streets in silence, but inside the library, warmth and peace filled every corner. Tall wooden shelves were lined with books, some new, some so old that their pages had turned yellow. Yet from those pages came a fragrance of knowledge that felt almost magical. The most beloved part of the library was the children's corner. There were tiny, colorful chairs, posters of cartoons on the walls, and storybooks scattered across little tables. But the true heart of the library was the man who visited every day, Mr. William. An elderly English professor with kind eyes and silver hair, he had spent his life teaching and guiding young minds. That afternoon, as the clock struck 3, the wooden doors creaked open. 2 children entered, Emily and George. Emily carried a small notebook in her hands, while George held his favorite pencil tightly under his arm. Their faces shone with innocence and curiosity. They ran straight toward William. "Good afternoon, sir," they greeted in unison. William smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, my little stars. What shall we learn today?" Emily hesitated for a moment, then asked shyly, "Sir, we heard you have a very old and special book. Could we see it?" William bent down and pulled out a heavy book from under his desk. The cover was made of leather, its corners decorated with faded golden patterns. As he opened it, a faint fragrance of old paper drifted out, and the children's eyes widened with wonder. The book was titled The Light of Knowledge. George whispered in amazement, "Wow, it looks magical. Is it only for grown-ups?" William chuckled softly. "No, my boy. Knowledge has no age. When children learn, the light grows brighter. When adults learn, the light spreads further. This book does not belong to one, it belongs to all." He placed the book gently in front of them. On the very first page, in bold letters, was written, "Knowledge is the bridge between childhood and wisdom." Emily read it aloud, her eyes sparkling. George leaned closer, exclaiming, "Look, it even has pictures with the stories." "Yes," William said, smiling. "Children learn through pictures, while adults learn through words. But the true lesson is the one that reaches the heart." They sat together, and William began reading aloud a story from the book, a tale of a shepherd boy who learned from books and later led his village toward prosperity. The children listened quietly, sometimes smiling, sometimes frowning in deep thought. When the story ended, William closed the book gently. "This book," he said softly, "is the most precious treasure of my life. But now I want it to belong to you." Emily and George gasped in surprise. "But sir, it's yours," Emily protested. William shook his head with a tender smile. "No, my dear, now it is yours. Knowledge is a treasure that never decreases when shared. It only grows. If you read this book and share its stories with others, the light will keep spreading." The children's eyes filled with tears of joy. George promised, "Sir, we'll read it every day. We'll share it with our parents, too. And one day, we'll give it to our own children." William gently placed his hands on their heads. "That," he whispered, "would be my greatest success." From that day on, Emily and George spent every evening in the library, reading the book together. They memorized the stories and retold them to their friends. Soon, their parents began joining them. The once quiet children's corner became alive with laughter, learning, and storytelling. The gift of the book was no longer limited to 2 children. It became a flame that lit up the entire neighborhood. One evening, William stood before the group, children, parents, and neighbors all gathered together, and said, "A book is like a lamp. If you light it in your heart, darkness disappears forever. Knowledge has no age. When shared, knowledge does not decrease, it grows. When children and adults learn together, the journey of wisdom becomes brighter. In the heart of an old English town stood a library that time had almost forgotten. Its walls were made of weathered bricks, and the tall windows with stained glass cast soft colors across the floor whenever the sun peeked through the clouds. Inside, the smell of old paper mixed with the faint scent of wood polish, creating an atmosphere that felt both ancient and comforting. For years, Mr. William, a retired professor, had cared for this library. His hair was white, his voice gentle, and his eyes carried the wisdom of a man who had spent his entire life surrounded by books. Children loved him because he never scolded them for being noisy, and adults respected him because he always spoke with kindness. One chilly afternoon, the library doors creaked open, and two children, Emily and George, hurried inside. Their cheeks were pink from the cold, but their eyes sparkled with excitement. "Good afternoon, sir," they greeted. William looked up from his desk and smiled. "Good afternoon, my little explorers. What mystery shall we uncover today?" Emily clutched her small notebook tightly. "Sir, we heard you have a very special book. Could we see it?" William leaned back in his chair, a knowing smile spreading across his face. Slowly, he reached beneath his desk and brought out a large, leather-bound book. Its corners were worn, its golden designs faded, yet it looked majestic, like something out of a fairy tale. "This," William said, placing the book carefully on the table, "is called The Light of Knowledge. It is very old, but its wisdom never fades." The children leaned forward. George whispered, "It looks magical. Is it only for adults?" William shook his head. "No, my boy. Knowledge is for everyone. For children, it is a seed. For adults, it is a harvest. A child who learns today becomes the wise guide of tomorrow." He opened the book. On the first page was written in elegant letters, "Knowledge is the bridge between childhood and wisdom." Emily read it aloud, her voice trembling with excitement. "What does it mean, sir?" she asked. William smiled. "It means that what you learn as children will carry you into adulthood. Knowledge is what connects your present to your future." He then began to read aloud a story from the book, a story about a poor shepherd boy who could not afford school but borrowed books and taught himself under the light of the moon. That boy grew up to become a wise leader, guiding his village to prosperity. As William spoke, Emily and George listened in awe. Their imaginations painted pictures of the shepherd boy reading under the stars. They saw his struggles, his dreams, and his triumphs. When the story ended, there was silence. Emily finally whispered, "It feels real, sir, like we were there with him." William closed the book gently. That is the power of stories. They take you to places you have never been and teach you lessons you will never forget. Then, after a long pause, he pushed the book toward them. "I want you to have this." The children gasped. George shook his head. "But, sir, it's yours." William's smile deepened. "No, my dear children, knowledge is never truly owned. It is meant to be shared. This book belongs to you now. Promise me you will not just read it, but also share its stories with others." Emily's eyes glistened with tears. "We promise, sir, we'll read it every day. We'll tell the stories to our friends and our parents." William placed his hands gently on their shoulders. "That is all I could ever wish for." From that day on, the children visited the library every evening. They read from the light of knowledge together, sometimes laughing, sometimes asking questions, and always eager to share what they learned. Their parents noticed the change in them and soon began joining the evening sessions. Before long, what had started with 2 children grew into a circle of families. Adults brought their own books, Children brought their curiosity, and together they created a community of learning. The once quiet library was now alive with voices, of laughter, of storytelling, and of knowledge being passed from one generation to another. One evening, as the group gathered around, William spoke softly. "A book is not just paper and ink. It is a lamp. When you light it in your heart, it shines on everyone around you. And when you share it, the darkness fades, not just for you, but for the world." And so, the gift of a single book became the gift of light to an entire town. Knowledge is for all ages, children and adults alike. Stories are bridges that connect the young to the wise. Shared knowledge becomes a light that spreads far beyond one person. One evening, as the group gathered around, William spoke softly. "A book is not just paper and ink. It is a lamp. When you light it in your heart, it shines on everyone around you. And when you share it, the darkness fades, not just for you, but for the world." And so, the gift of a single book became the gift of light to an entire town. Knowledge is for all ages, children and adults alike. Stories are bridges that connect the young to the wise. Shared knowledge becomes a light that spreads far beyond one person.